When I was a kid, my family used to live in some apartments called the Hideaway Villas. It was a small complex composed of only 12 units and all were downstairs. They sat directly behind a park and were surrounded by trees on either side. They weren't much to look at, but they came with brand new furniture and appliances. Each unit had its own laundry, gym, and office. Utilities were included in the rent, all for the low price of $350 a month. Seeing how my parents were strapped for cash, they immediately jumped on it. It wasn't a bad place to live. All but 2 of our neighbors were nuclear families and we got along well. We regularly borrowed from each other, had communal parties, kept an eye on each other's children, and were generally very amiable. It was actually quite idyllic, except for the fact that we had to play the game. You see, every 3rd Friday of the month was game night. Not grab a board game and call some friends over game night. No, this was a special game that the owner made up, and everyone was required to participate. The rules were simple. At 8 o'clock, everyone was instructed to go inside their home, close and lock all windows and doors, shut the blinds, and turn off all lights and electronics. Families were to gather in the living room and wait. The manager would then call out an apartment number over a megaphone. If it was yours, you were told to step outside. If it wasn't, you were instructed to turn on your porch light, then go straight to bed. No one knew exactly what happened if your number was called. Some families were gone the next day and we were not allowed to speak of them. Others stayed, but there was something different about them. They became withdrawn and paranoid. They would move within a week. Afterwards, a new family would take their place. The year I turned 14, our number was called. My birthday was a week before. I had a party at the park. The whole complex was there along with the manager. He had given me a card with a black background and the words "Happy Birthday" scribbled in red letters on the front. Inside was one of those paper doll chains. There were only 3 people in the chain and my family members' names were written on the back. Well, me, my mom, and my sister's names anyway. My dad was curiously missing. I asked the manager about it, and he told me that the card was actually from the owner who happened to be a bit forgetful. That answer was satisfying enough, so I tossed it in a pile with the rest of the cards and went about my day. Then Friday came. Mom was telling us a story as we sat in the dark of the living room. It was the only thing we could do to pass the time during the game. Usually, the owner took about 20 minutes to come to his decision, although I suspect he always knew from the start who he was going to pick. Just as Mom was about to finish the story, we heard the manager call out, "Apartment 12, you're up." 12, our number. We froze. My mom looked towards my dad for guidance. He simply shrugged and directed us to the door. When he opened it, the manager was standing there. "Close your eyes," he demanded. We closed them and walked to the middle of the complex, holding on to each other so that we wouldn't trip over anything. "Do you know why you're here?" the manager asked. "No," replied my dad. "Because you guys haven't been good tenants," said the manager. "But we pay our rent on time. We don't start trouble. We get along with the neighbors, "I know," said the manager, interrupting my father. "You've done everything right, but Mr. Tillis is very particular about what makes a good tenant." "Mr. Tillis?" inquired my father. "The owner," the manager replied sharply. Until then, none of us knew the owner's name. In fact, no one had ever met him. He seemed to only exist on game night. Can he explain to us why he doesn't consider us good tenants? My dad asked. The manager began to talk to Mr. Tillis in a very low voice, like a whisper but not quite. Yet, no matter how hard I strained my ears, I couldn't make out what they were saying. Let's just say Mr. Tillis is a very caring man. He loves his tenants and gives a lot to them. He built these apartments with his own hands and wishes for his tenants to be as caring and selfless as him. But sometimes all they do is take and never give back. The manager explained. I see, replied my father. So he has to dole out punishments, but believe me, it pains him greatly, said the manager. What's going to happen? My mother yelled in a panic. You'll be taken somewhere just for a short time. Don't worry, you'll be home for breakfast, he said with a laugh. Mr. Bennett, he said, referring to my father, please come with me. What happened after that is a blur. I remember walking for a long time, likely through the woods. I heard my sister whimpering behind me. We were led into a building and down some steps. It was very cold and the floor was wet. My feet were soaking. I felt something whip my leg. It was less like a belt and more like a tongue. My sister felt it too, and she cried out a moment later. The tongue touched my ear and I felt the most excruciating pain in my life. It was like someone took a big needle and plunged it into my eardrum. I blacked out and woke up in my bed. It was the same for my mom and sister. But we didn't see my dad for 3 days. When he did come back, he was different. He had become withdrawn and paranoid. Every little sound made him jump, and he was quick to anger. We moved a week later. He had gotten $10,000 as a parting gift from Mr. Tillis. My dad called it hush money. We tried to get our lives back on track after that, but what happened that night would prove to be too much for my father to bear, and he committed suicide. That was 15 years ago, and I have since made peace with my father's death, though yesterday I had a panic attack. Why? Because it was the 3rd Friday of the month and I was searching for a new place to live. Guess what popped up? An ad for the Hideaway Villas.